You might remember that the pandemic put a stop to live music for a while, but something interesting started to happen. Almost as soon as concerts came back, artists started dropping out of tours to take care of their mental health. This happened with Shawn Mendes, this happened with the band Wet Leg, it happened with Arlo Parks, and lots of others that I can think of. There's this new book out that addresses the mental health impact that touring takes on artists and crew members. It's called Touring and Mental Health, and it's edited by Tamsin Embleton. She spoke with a lot of musicians for this book, and one of them was the drummer for Radiohead, Philip Selway. I got to talk with both of them about it, and I started by asking Tamsin to talk about how she became a psychotherapist after working in the music industry.
I was in between jobs as a booker in the industry, so I booked venues and club nights and a festival, and I had a bit of time when I was trying to decide what my next move would be. And a friend of mine, Hiroki, contacted me and said, look, I know you're a Nick Cave fan. Would you fancy tour managing one of my artists, Anna Calvi, who's going out on the road with Grinderman, the Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds side project? So I jumped at the chance, and it really helped me understand a lot more about what touring's really like. Even as a booker, working at venues day in, day out, I think I had a slightly romanticized view of, or I'd underestimated what some of the stresses were. So, long story short, we were in Leipzig in Germany at a post-show dinner, and I found myself having this quite surreal conversation with the members of both of the bands and Nick Cave. And Nick and I had both been in therapy for a while at that point, and we were trying to explain what we got from it, why we were in therapy, how it was kind of getting us close to our inner essence and helping us express things. And that conversation ended up being a pivotal point, not quite immediately, but later I realised it was a catalyst for change as I was trying to figure out, what would I do next? And I realised that I worked well with artists and worked well with people in distress, but felt that my time the road had kind of come to the end as my time as a booker. So I decided to retrain and specialise in working with artists because I knew someone out there was Nick Cave's therapist. I've not become Nick Cave's therapist, I should say, but that's still someone else.
Philip, we saw a number of young musicians and artists throughout the pandemic. They've made the choice to completely cancel shows, cancel tours in order to focus on mental health. I'm thinking here of people like Shawn Mendes, the band Wet Leg, Arlo Parks. They all did this. As someone who's been touring for decades now, how would you say you've seen the music industry change the ways that it talks about mental health?
I'd say where we are at the moment is far more positive than when I first started touring. I mean, the attitude was very much, put up or shut up when I started touring. And to see somebody like Arlo Parks be able to just state that I'm not in a good place. I need time to step back from this. I need time to continue growing as an artist, and actually where taking that kind of time for yourself, taking that care of yourself, be that on tour, be that in recording, be that in finding a workable schedule for yourself. I think what it means then is that you can carry on and become a much more developed artist, a much more powerful artist, and actually you stand a good chance of being a fairly decent human being as well alongside that.
I mean, I like that idea of, having this information makes you stand a better chance of being a decent human being, because of course you can't really be that when you are experiencing the distress that comes with tour all this time. Tamsin, Philip mentioned there a culture of put up and shut up. A lot of people you consulted with spoke of this idea of the culture of silence on tour. What did people tell you about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So no matter what role you're in on the road, the stresses build, and they build just by being out on the road and away from the usual people, places and practices that keep you stable. Then there's a role specific stress on top. And what that means is that a few weeks in, everybody's in a stress state and they're responding in different ways and they're trying to keep their heads above water. And what that means is you're living in close confines, living and working together with people in this really intense experience, and emotions can spread like wildfire through the group. So one of the ways of trying to protect against that is that people may not address some things that are kind of in the room. So if somebody's, so long as, the show goes on, essentially, I know it's an old kind of, hackneyed phrase, the show must go on, but there is that feeling there that so long as you're not being a complete nightmare and the show is continuing, you're doing your job, you're showing up, then things get unaddressed or they're pushed underground, which can then lead to secondary difficulties. Things don't get resolved then. There can be tensions, there can be cliques, there can be gossiping, there can be all these other ways that sort of affect group dynamics too.
Well, I was going to say, the most fans who attend shows, their interaction with the tour is the 2 hours on stage. But the tour is not that, right? The tour is everything before and after. The tour is the travel schedule. The tour is, what the time that you have to get up in order to make your next flight, or the time they have to sort of be back on the bus. And there's all these stresses do end up adding up. Philip, I got to ask you, you met all the members of Radiohead in school. How would you say the dynamic has changed between all of you on tour, especially as you started to become more successful, would you say?
Well, it's interesting. We were at school, but we kind of, it didn't grow out of the friendship at school. It grew out of seeing each other and thinking we could be a good band together. There was that commitment to the kind of the professional side of it, I guess, from the outset. But you go through all these as the band grows, as you do more touring, you do more records, you reach more people. There are different pressures which appear at each stage of it, and so you end up feeling that you do go through these very, very intense experiences together. I mean, I think all of us have said at some point, it's almost like a sibling relationship,
right?
Where you go through this, you have this common experience of being part of that family. You might all be very different people, and you bring very different skills and personality traits to the thing. But because you've been through this very intense experience together, it's there's a richness to it.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Commotion, and my name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. My guests today are psychotherapist Tamsin Embleton and Radiohead's Philip Selway. We're talking about the mental health impact of music tours. Tamsin, you touched a little bit on how performers can lose their sense of self on the road. What strikes you of this kind of identity crisis, you think, that musicians were talking about?
I do hear it a lot in my work with artists, that especially if you're touring very intensely, you may be surrounded by people who are doing their very best to make you as happy as possible. And on top of that, you're meeting a lot of people who have elevated you. They have this particular relationship with you, which we call parasocial relationships, which is where I call it dazzling sometimes. When some of the artists that I work with, they realize they have this effect on people, that people are so delighted to see them and are hanging on their every word. And I think that can be quite surreal. It can go a number of ways. Either your sense of self can become inflated. You can start to believe that you're superior to other people because you're being treated like you're special. Or you may become quite mistrustful because something in you knows that actually that's not quite the case. You are an ordinary person. You may be very skilled and have talent in certain areas, but you're also an ordinary person with flaws and things like that. So one of the interviews I had that touched upon this was with Taylor Hanson from the band Tamsin. And he was saying, look, your artists are surrounded by people who lionize them and sort of lift them up and constantly telling them that they're special in some way. And you have to find ways to stay grounded, whether that's with contact with friends and family that you knew before you got famous, if they are healthy relationships, or connecting with other parts of yourself or other roles that you have outside of this one that is so celebrated.
Well, I also got to ask you about romantic relationships, Tamsin, because in the book you talked a little bit about how artists shared that the romantic relationships tend to suffer on tour.
I guess what I hadn't thought about was that, of course, when you're on tour, if you're touring internationally, you're not just physically unavailable to people at home and vice versa. But there's this psychological distance as well that's created, which can be very threatening. Actually, we talked about that, I think, in our interview as well, Philip. You know, you're going through...
I had a moment reading the book where there was one of his quotes. It was going, you know, it's kind of my relationship with my wife, which is my grounding in this tour, makes it all doable, but kind of the more I do it, I feel that the more it takes me away from that at points and harms that. And I was thinking, that speaks to me so much. And I got to the end of the quote, and it was Philip Selway.
Oh, that's me.
What a relief that it was you. That's great. Tell us a little bit more about that. Like, I want to know how your wife became this sort of touchstone for you while you're on tour. We've been together since the touring really took off. I mean, we've known each other before kind of the band really took off. You know, particularly in the early days where we'd be away for months at a time. We'd go like 11 months out of the year at points. And that can be a very difficult situation to keep building a relationship. And so for us, we knew how important that relationship was to the two of us. We did everything that we could, you know, make sure that we talk every day as much as we could. And even at those points where it felt like, cool, we're 6 weeks into this one, this is feeling hard. But actually, you know, where the temptation might have been to think, let's not talk for a couple of days. We didn't do that because I think we felt that actually once you start to break down that daily contact, then actually everything else starts to unravel around it. Because you're both living kind of quite different experiences. Your heads can be in different places, you're in different time zones. And so actually finding ways that you can step into each other's worlds when you're not together, I think that is vital. My relationship with my wife has been a wonderful experience in my life, and it's also been I'd say the most important element of my longevity in making music as well. Philip, I would say that the next step is for you to write a marriage self-help book. That sounds fantastic. I think like that's a wonderful way to put it. I think the next question I want to ask you, Tamsin, is about the ways that you poured so much into this book, and then now you're in a position where you are seeing it do work in the world. What are your hopes for this book?
Oh, I'm just glad it's done at this stage. I feel like I've made it up. I was like, oh my God, I've been working on this so long. Does it actually exist? I think what's next is I really want it to spark some conversations and help people feel a bit less alone. You know, if you see yourself represented in a book or that your experience represented in a book, it can take some shame out of it. You know, you can say, oh, this is a psychological experience that is shared by other people. I think that can be very helpful. And we're trying to develop more psychoeducation, focusing on relationships more and more, I think, in the industry, because relationships in the industry can be so complex. You know, people can seem like your best friend, but they're also, you know, your manager or something else. So it's kind of trying to, condense some of the features of those relationships so that people can kind of navigate them in a way that maybe has some boundaries in and things like that.
I love everything about that. Philip, I think we have this idea of the touring life that has been maybe formed by a lot of pop culture and maybe music movies that have given us this idea of like the tour life as the hard life. I like the idea of thinking about this book and then thinking about what a music tour looks like 10 years from now. And it's an artist meditating in the morning and then checking in with yourself and then, I don't know, healing your relationships on the road. What are your hopes for what this book does for people?
What I see in this book are incredible strategies and that knowledge that makes it less of a scary place to actually start talking about what can be troubling you on tour. And if people are able to talk about that and actually seek help if need be, then actually a lot of being on the road, a lot of being on tour is an absolutely wonderful experience.
I love that conception, and I love that future, because if you are a fan of an artist, I don't think you want them to suffer in order to give you the work and the music that you so admire. Tamsin, Philip, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tamsin Embleton is a psychotherapist and editor of the book Touring and Mental Health, The Music Industry Manual. Philip Selway is a drummer of Radiohead and just released a new solo record called Strange Dance. They were both in London, England.